The National Weather Service just put out a statement that stopped me in my tracks this morning. Strong to severe thunderstorms continuing from eastern Texas into the lower Mississippi and Tennessee valleys. The strongest storms capable of producing a few strong tornadoes, EF2 and higher, damaging wind gusts, large hail, and locally heavy to excessive rainfall that may result in flash and urban flooding. At the same time, Las Vegas is about to hit 100 degrees for the first time this year. Sacramento is about to reach 90 degrees for the first time since last autumn. Inland California is about to be 20 to 30 degrees warmer than it was just days ago. And somewhere between those two extremes, between the tornadoes and the triple-digit heat, a massive cold front is organizing in the northern plains right now, building strength and preparing to sweep over most of the country next week. One country. 3 simultaneous weather catastrophes. And the biggest one hasn't even arrived yet. This is Weather Signal, and we need to talk about what's coming. Before we look at what is building for next week, you need to understand where things stand right now, because the severe weather that has been hammering the southern United States all week long is not finished yet. As of this morning, May 8th, the Weather Prediction Center confirmed that the cold front responsible for the outbreak across Mississippi and Alabama this week is still on the move, pushing south and east. A fast-moving shortwave at the base of a deep long-wave trough is supporting the progressive movement of storms south and east across southern Alabama, South Georgia, and eventually into the northern panhandle of Florida. The clash of air masses between the cooler, drier air that has moved into the interior southeast and the very warm, unstable tropical air mass sitting over the Gulf of Mexico is creating a violent boundary that keeps generating severe weather wherever those two air masses collide. AccuWeather senior meteorologist Alex Sosnowski confirmed this morning that severe weather and torrential downpours will continue across the southern United States into the end of this week, following reports of several dangerous tornadoes across Mississippi on Wednesday night. South and east of the storm track, warm and humid air will fuel severe thunderstorms from far southeastern Louisiana to southern North Carolina today, with the main threats being strong wind gusts, torrential downpours, and the possibility of an isolated tornado. This is the tail end of a week-long severe weather marathon, but just because the peak intensity of this event is past does not mean the threat has vanished. The atmosphere along the Gulf Coast is still loaded with tropical moisture, still volatile, and still dangerous. The Weather Prediction Center issued a marginal risk of excessive rainfall today, covering portions of the central Gulf Coast through southern Georgia, as well as portions of the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. That marginal risk designation might sound mild compared to the enhanced and moderate risk designations we saw earlier this week, but a marginal risk for excessive rainfall is not something to dismiss. It means forecasters are confident that at least some areas within that zone will receive rainfall rates high enough to cause flash flooding, particularly in low-lying areas and urban environments, where drainage is already overwhelmed from multiple days of heavy rain. In meteorological terms, the ground across much of this region is as close to fully saturated as it can get. Every additional inch of rain is an inch that has nowhere to go except into streets, into homes, and into already flooded waterways. While the Gulf Coast deals with the final act of this week's severe weather, a completely separate storm is already organizing across the central United States. The Storm Prediction Center's Day 4-8 outlook described the setup in careful but pointed language. An upper shortwave trough is located over Texas today, Friday. Meanwhile, another upper shortwave trough is migrating from the central Rockies into the central plains. These features will result in modestly increasing mid- and upper-level northwesterly flow across the plains. At the surface, modest southerly low-level flow will continue to transport Gulf moisture northward across the southern plains and lower Mississippi Valley. A dry line will extend across western Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, and weak surface cyclogenesis, meaning a surface low is developing, is possible across the central and southern plains. That dry line and that developing surface low could be the focal point for thunderstorm development on Saturday. AccuWeather confirmed this specifically, noting that on Friday, a pocket of severe thunderstorms is forecast to form over the southern portion of the Plains states, across portions of Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Arkansas, with hail and damaging wind gusts as the main threats. On Saturday, the concentration of thunderstorms is forecast to become severe over portions of the plains and may overlap Friday's threat zone, with hail and damaging wind gusts as the primary hazards in Oklahoma, central and eastern Kansas, southwestern Missouri, northwestern Arkansas, and part of north-central Texas. Fox Weather added that many of the same areas hit hard last month will be in the renewed threat zone again, specifically naming Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, Oklahoma, and Texas. Here is the critical piece of context that makes Saturday's threat particularly concerning. This is not fresh, unaffected territory. These are communities in Oklahoma and Texas that were hit by an EF4 tornado in Enid on April 23rd, with winds estimated at 170 to 175 miles per hour. These are communities in North Texas that dealt with 6 consecutive days of severe weather from April 24th through April 29th, producing 287 reports of hail, wind damage, flooding, and tornadoes. An EF3 tornado struck Palo Pinto and Parker counties near Mineral Wells, with winds estimated at 145 miles per hour, the strongest tornado in Parker County since 1990. And now, less than 2 weeks later, severe storms are targeting the same zip codes again. Recovery crews are still working. Insurance adjusters are still assessing damage. Power infrastructure that was repaired is now at risk of being damaged again. That is the human reality behind this Saturday threat. The Storm Prediction Center was honest about the forecast uncertainty for this weekend, noting that how far north quality moisture return will occur before Saturday night and early Sunday is uncertain, and that deep layer flow is not forecast to be very strong. That means that while the ingredients for severe weather are present, the overall intensity of Saturday's threat is likely lower than what we saw midweek. But that uncertainty cuts both ways. If moisture return gets further north and earlier than models currently suggest, Saturday's threat could be higher than currently anticipated. Now let us talk about the headline story, because while this week's severe weather has been dangerous and exhausting for the communities experiencing it, what is building for early next week has the potential to be the most significant severe weather event in weeks. Fox Weather was direct about what is coming. A massive cold front will move into the northern plains and into the Midwest on Monday before sweeping over most of the country through the week, ushering in severe storms, flooding rain and snow for higher elevations. This is not a routine frontal passage. This is the kind of large-scale atmospheric overturning that meteorologists track for days in advance precisely because of its potential to generate widespread, multi-hazard impacts across a huge swath of the country. The Weather Prediction Center's extended forecast discussion, issued Wednesday, May 6th, laid out the mechanics clearly. The closed upper-level low over eastern Canada will continue to bring cyclonic flow and multiple shortwave energies near the base of the mean trough. This will facilitate the progression of a strong cold front that will sweep through the eastern half of the country early in the period. The frontal passage will bring widespread showers and thunderstorms across portions of the Great Lakes, the lower Mississippi Valley and Southern Plains, the Ohio Valley, the Northwest, and the Mid-Atlantic, with locally heavy rainfall possible along the boundary through Monday. Meanwhile, the southern end of the current stalled front will continue to linger across the Gulf Coast region, where persistent moisture pooling and weak impulses embedded in the subtropical flow could support occasional convection and heavy rainfall along the southeast through Sunday. What this means in practical terms is that the country is walking into a classic severe weather pattern for early next week. A powerful cold front charging from the northern plains, southward and eastward. Warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico, already sitting in place across Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Mississippi. Air that has had all week to deepen and become even more tropical in character. A dry line positioned across the western plains, providing an additional trigger for explosive storm development, and a jet stream carrying enough energy to sustain organized, long-lived supercell thunderstorms once they get going. Every ingredient on the severe weather checklist is being stocked right now. The Storm Prediction Center's Day 4-8 outlook stated that by days 6 and 7, that is Sunday, May 10th and Monday, May 11th, another cold front is forecast to move east and southeast across much of the United States. And as it impinges on the moist air mass across the southern plains to the southeast and mid-Atlantic, some severe potential could develop. The SPC was careful to note that predictability is currently low late in the forecast period, which is simply the honest reality of trying to pinpoint exactly where the highest risk corridor will set up 5 or more days out. But low predictability is not the same as low probability. The threat is real. The ingredients are there. The pattern is hostile. What is uncertain is the precise location and timing, and that uncertainty will narrow dramatically over the next 48 to 72 hours as new model data comes in. Let me be very specific about the tornado component of next week's setup, because this is where the atmospheric setup becomes genuinely alarming. AccuWeather senior meteorologist Alice Sosnowski noted this week that severe weather and torrential downpours will continue across the southern United States, and the pattern going into next week features the kind of wind shear environment that the Storm Prediction Center described earlier this week in explicit terms. Earlier Wednesday, the SPC noted that moderately steep mid-level lapse rates and seasonably rich moisture with precipitable water values will support strong buoyancy ahead of a front, with Melcape values approaching 2,500 joules per kilogram over Louisiana and Mississippi. That is a high-end instability value. They specifically warned that gradual intensification of storms in the moist environment will likely result in several strong supercells developing late in the afternoon through the evening, with large to very large hail, damaging gusts, and tornadoes possible. Now, that language was written for Wednesday's event. But The atmospheric pattern that generated Wednesday's enhanced risk across Alabama and Mississippi is the same pattern that is going to set the table for next week's cold front. The closed upper low anchored over eastern Canada keeps ejecting shortwave troughs into the central United States. Each shortwave is another trigger for severe weather. Each cold front that charges out of the northern plains behind those shortwaves is another opportunity for explosive thunderstorm development where cold, dry air collides with warm tropical Gulf moisture. This is a machine that is not stopping. It is cycling through the atmosphere in the exact same way it has been cycling all spring. For the tornado threat specifically, the most dangerous scenario is one where discrete supercells can develop and maintain their organization for at least a few hours before merging into a linear system. The Storm Prediction Center stated this explicitly for Wednesday's event. A strong tornado is possible with a sustained discrete supercell, and storms may eventually grow upscale into clusters, at which point damaging winds would become the primary severe risk. That same life cycle, discrete supercells transitioning into a damaging squall line, is the most likely storm mode for next week's event as well. And the critical danger window, as it always is with this type of event, is the period of discrete supercell activity before the line consolidates. That is when EF2, EF3, and even stronger tornadoes become possible. AccuWeather's severe weather forecast for 2026 is particularly sobering in this context. AccuWeather meteorologist Alex Duffus warned at the start of the season, "Do not let your guard down this severe weather season. Flash floods and damaging wind gusts can be just as destructive as tornadoes and often impact a much larger area." The highest hail risk for the entire 2026 season is expected from Texas to Alabama, with another hotspot around Iowa, northern Missouri, eastern Nebraska, and northeastern Kansas. That geographic footprint is almost exactly the region, sitting in the crosshairs of next week's cold front. This is not coincidence. This is the pattern that was forecast months ago, now verifying in real time. The tornado threat gets the attention. The hail threat gets the dramatic photos. But of all the hazards associated with next week's system, flooding may ultimately be the one that kills people and devastates communities on the largest scale. The Weather Prediction Center's extended forecast discussion noted that locally heavy rainfall is possible along the frontal boundary through Monday, and that the southern stalled front will support occasional convection and heavy rainfall along the southeast through Sunday. Combine that with what has already fallen this week, multiple days of heavy rain across Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Arkansas, and the soil moisture situation across the central Gulf states is critically saturated. Wikipedia's article on flash floods describes the phenomenon clearly. Flash floods occur when excessive water fills normally dry creeks and rivers, or drainage channels very rapidly, or overflows levees in a short period of time. Unlike regular flooding, flash floods are defined by a rapid rate of onset. The water can rise from ankle deep to life-threatening depth within minutes. The primary danger is not just the depth of the water, but the velocity. Fast-moving water as shallow as 2 feet exerts enough force to knock a person off their feet and sweep them downstream. 6 inches of fast-moving water can knock an adult down. 2 feet can sweep away most vehicles, including large trucks and SUVs. This is the flood reality facing communities across the Gulf Coast, Tennessee Valley, and southern Appalachians heading into the weekend and early next week. The Weather Prediction Center noted persistent moisture pooling as the stalled front lingers across the Gulf Coast region. Moisture pooling is precisely the meteorological condition that produces training thunderstorms. Storms that move in the same direction as the mid-level atmospheric flow, passing over the same areas repeatedly, stacking inches of rain on top of inches of rain already on the ground. AccuWeather's summer 2026 forecast specifically warned that flash flood events are expected in parts of the Plains, Mississippi Valley, and Ohio Valley at higher frequency this summer, citing the devastating July 4th, 2025 Kerr County, Texas. Flash floods that killed more than 100 people and caused between $18 and $22 billion in economic damage as a sobering precedent. The conditions that produced that disaster, saturated ground, tropical moisture surging northward, slow-moving frontal boundaries, are the same conditions developing right now across a wider region. Now, let us talk about what is happening simultaneously on the other side of the country. Because while the East braces for another round of severe storms, the West is walking into a heat emergency that has been escalating all week and is about to reach its peak this weekend. AccuWeather senior meteorologist Tom Kynes put it plainly. Many inland areas of California will be 20 to 30 degrees warmer from Thursday into the weekend compared to last weekend. Kynes specifically noted that places like Las Vegas and Fresno, California, could see their first 100-degree temperatures of the year this weekend. Sacramento, California, should reach 90 degrees for the first time since last autumn. This is a heat surge that is arriving after a 6-week hiatus from extreme temperatures, following the extraordinary March 2026 Southwest heat wave. that Yale Climate Connections called one of the 6 most astonishing weather events of this century a heat event that rapid response analyses from Climate Central and World Weather Attribution concluded would have been virtually impossible without human-caused climate change. The mechanism driving this heat surge is a strong area of high pressure building at multiple levels of the atmosphere across the interior west. When high pressure builds in the desert southwest, the sinking air suppresses cloud formation and prevents convection. Without clouds to reflect sunlight and without rain to cool the surface, temperatures build day after day as the ground dries out and the sun bakes an increasingly parched landscape. Adding to this is a general offshore flow pattern, where winds travel from the land toward the ocean. This prevents any cooling from the Pacific Ocean and eliminates the coastal marine layer that normally keeps temperatures in check along the California coast. AccuWeather noted that the effects of a storm that brought showers and cooler air over the weekend will fade through the rest of the week, and that while this heat surge will not be as extreme as the record-shattering March heat wave, some locations could still challenge daily records. The wildfire dimension of this western heat surge cannot be overstated. CNN reported that an intense marine heat wave has set in off the California coast, stretching down the Baja Peninsula and more than 500 miles to the southwest, a large, long-lasting, and record-setting marine heat event that is forecast to persist and intensify, altering weather conditions on the west coast and potentially making future heat waves more likely and more intense. Colorado's Democratic Governor Jared Polis issued a state of emergency earlier this week in response to escalating wildfire concerns, with officials describing the 2026 wildfire outlook at their annual preparedness briefing in Broomfield as anticipating an exceptionally dire next few months. AccuWeather's summer 2026 forecast identified the worst of the fire season as likely to focus across California, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming. The combination of record low snowpack from the driest winter in Colorado's history, weeks without meaningful rainfall in California, building heat and offshore winds, is the exact recipe for catastrophic wildfires. What is happening right now, severe storms in the south, heat in the west, snow in the mountains in May, and a huge frontal system organizing for next week, is not a random string of unrelated weather events. It is the expression of a specific atmospheric regime that has dominated 2026 from the very beginning, and understanding it explains why this forecast looks the same week after week. The core driver is a persistent upper-level trough east of the Rockies that keeps diving cold air southward from Canada while simultaneously pulling Gulf moisture northward from the south. The boundary between those air masses, the cold front, is where severe weather fires. And because the pattern keeps regenerating that trough, the cold fronts keep coming, the Gulf moisture keeps returning, and the severe weather cycle keeps repeating. The Storm Prediction Center's Day 4-8 discussion stated it bluntly. Mean upper troughing will persist east of the Rockies for the entire forecast period. That is not a forecast for one storm. That is a description of a locked-in pattern. AccuWeather's 2026 summer forecast identified El Niño as the accelerant. El Niño is expected to develop early in the summer and will have a growing influence on the tropics and the broader weather pattern across the United States through the rest of 2026. AccuWeather stated it could even evolve into a rare super El Niño later in 2026, which would have even bigger impacts on weather across the United States in the final months of 2026 and the start of 2027. AccuWeather's senior meteorologist Paul Pastelok said, "Severe weather is expected to be most active in June and July from the plains to the Midwest and Ohio Valley, and that the flooding zone to watch most closely runs from Texas to the Ohio Valley, including the Texas Hill Country devastated in 2025. The pattern is not moderating, it is ramping up. For anyone in the southern plains, Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, Arkansas, Missouri, the action item right now is preparation, not reaction. The massive cold front targeting next week is still being refined by forecast models, but the broad outlines are clear. Severe weather is coming. It will include tornadoes, large hail, and damaging winds. The exact timing and location will sharpen over the next 48 to 72 hours. Use this window of relative calm this weekend to identify your shelter, charge your devices, stock supplies, and make sure every member of your household knows what to do when warnings are issued. Do not wait until the Storm Prediction Center issues a moderate or high-risk outlook to start preparing. By that point, the storm is already close. For communities in the southeast still dealing with the aftermath of this week's storms, the immediate priority is flooding awareness. The stalled front lingering over the Gulf Coast is going to keep producing rain through the weekend. If your area flooded this week, there's a genuine risk of it flooding again. Know your evacuation routes. Have supplies ready. And under no circumstances drive through flooded roads. That single decision, trying to cross one more flooded road, kills people every year in situations exactly like this one. For residents of the western United States heading into this weekend's heat surge, the danger window runs from today through Sunday, with temperatures peaking Saturday and Sunday across interior California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. Las Vegas is expecting its first 100-degree reading of the year. Fresno and Sacramento are both jumping into summer temperatures with no gradual transition. If you are elderly, if you have young children, if you work outdoors, or if you do not have reliable air conditioning, this weekend requires your full attention. Heat exhaustion develops faster than people expect, especially when the human body has not yet acclimatized to summer heat. Drink water continuously. Limit outdoor exposure between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. Check on vulnerable neighbors. Know the difference between heat exhaustion, which can be treated by moving to a cool environment and hydrating, and heat stroke, which is a medical emergency requiring an immediate call to 911. This system is not a routine weather week. The severe storms happening right now, the heat building in the west, and the massive cold front organizing for next week are all part of the same hostile atmospheric pattern that has made 2026 one of the most active severe weather years in recent memory. Stay informed, monitor your local forecasts daily, keep weather signal notifications turned on, and take every warning seriously, because in this pattern, the atmosphere has proven repeatedly that it means business.